Hi, everyone. So glad you could join us today. Welcome to Civil Intersections, Asian Latino Solidarity Movements and Cross-Cultural Dialogue. My name is Andrea Kim Neighbors, and I'm the Manager of Education Initiatives at the Smithsonian's Asian Pacific American Center. And I'm very pleased and honored to be presenting with my colleague and friend, Emily Key.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session. My name is Emily Key. I am the Director of Education for the Smithsonian Latino Center and our upcoming Molina Family Latino Gallery. And I am also an Explainer alum. So one of those commercials that you saw at the beginning of our session, I was a product of that program, graduated from that program back in 2005 after 3 years at the Air and Space Museum, and then had various experiences to the point of one of the young gentlemen who was talking about the networking opportunities, and worked in a small gallery at the Smithsonian and ended up here at the Smithsonian Latino Center. And we're excited to be partnering with the Asian Pacific American Center on this and several other projects.
Yeah. Emily, thanks so much for sharing that. I was getting some chills watching those videos about the Smithsonian, feeling some Smithsonian pride here. As folks are getting settled in, we have a question that we'd love for you to consider and think about with us. And the question is, what words come to mind when you think about civil discourse? To guide us in our conversation today and our reflections today, we're going to be doing a lot of reflecting today. We've created a Padlet. And so if you check the chat, there will be a link that will take you to a Padlet with a series of questions. And when you open up the link, you'll see every one question in a row. But what we would like for you to do is focus where it says question 1. What words come to mind when you think about civil discourse? So throughout this presentation, we're going to be sharing a lot of questions with you, questions that Emily and I have asked ourselves as we thought about the importance of civil discourse and the intersections of civil discourse throughout important moments in Asian Latino stories and communities in American history, but also how these Asian and Latino communities are important American histories and American stories that we hope that you can take into your own teaching, into your own learning, and hopefully it sparks some new conversations with you and with your students. So as we settle in, go ahead and take a look at this Padlet, and we'll be keeping an eye on responses as they come in. But Emily, I'm going to ask you, what are some things that come to mind when you think about civil discourse?
I think one of the main things I think about is just having a conversation with a colleague or a friend, a neighbor, someone that I have met through different walks of life. Just talking about their perspectives and meeting in the middle, finding a space where both our perspectives can be shared and can be maybe not agreed upon necessarily, but at least discussed. And I think that's a great opportunity to just learn more, not only about the topic that you're talking about, but also the person that you're speaking to and their own experience, whether it's their personal experience, their academic experience or professional experience, or just their family lived experience. I think that is a very important part of civil discourse, is getting to know the person you're talking to, not just about the topic itself.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And what I would add to that, which I think is a great answer, is the power of listening to what people have to share. And I'm looking at some responses coming in. Active listening, absolutely. Listening to what someone is saying, but more than the words, the meanings behind it, the impacts of those lived experiences, guided discussion. That's a great part of civil discourse. That's a great part of what we'll be talking about today throughout our presentation as well. These are great responses, and we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts to these questions as well. Another one just came in. Discussing political and social needs in the world with others in the workplace or in the community. That's beautiful. And I hope that throughout our presentation today, you can think about how we can look to histories as a guide for how we might approach civil discourse in our own communities, and also that civil discourse looks different for everybody. So for this project, it is obviously at the heart of what we've been doing for Civil Intersections. And what we're going to be diving into even more while learning more about the power of civil discourse is also a very important American story, which is the story of the farm workers movement, which took place in the 1960s in California. As we continue, we're going to learn more about the key players in this movement, why the movement took place, and what happened after the movement, and how we might think about the impacts and relevancy of the movement today. So moving on, what will you take away from this presentation today? We hope a number of things. One is reflecting on civil discourse, but we also hope what you take away are new ideas and approaches for adapting informal education techniques that we commonly use as museum educators at the Smithsonian. And hopefully you can find new ways in modeling with us and practicing with us, things that you can marry with your own classroom teaching or however you teach in your practice. We also have the hope that you take away tips on how to apply first voice narratives in the classrooms. We'll be talking a lot about primary source materials and the many ways in which primary sources can be used. Speaking of resources, we'll be talking about resources and approaches for centering humanity and centering the joy. Through all of that is centering lived experience. We're also going to talk about tools and tips for unpacking bias. And we're going to talk about tips on how to build in time for reflection, time for team building, and sharing experiences. So next slide, please.
So let's dive right in. I think one of the things that we want to do before we really tackle the content is really center our Smithsonian collection and the idea of object-based learning. Here at the Smithsonian, we do a lot of this every day where our educators, our floor managers, and our visitors engage in really diving deep and looking into an object and thinking a lot about the kinds of questions that might spur on giving you context about this object. So one of the things we'd like to just model today, and we'll be modeling it with ourselves, but please feel free to think about this as you watch this presentation, is how do we talk about an object? How do we learn more and sort of do inquiry-based learning through objects, which is really one of the strengths and the beauties of Smithsonian and of museums in general, is this ability to take a first voice object and really give it context for what you're teaching in the classroom. And in this case, it's the farm workers movement. So Andrea, if you would humor me in going through this modeling exercise, as you see this object in front of you, what do you think it is?
Well,
what is it made of?
It looks like a gardening tool. It looks like a handheld gardening tool that I might use to work the soil, perhaps to create, a place for me to plant seeds or to take weeds out. And it looks like it's made out of wood. It looks like it's made out of some kind of metal. And it looks like it might also have some nails to keep those things together. But it looks like those are the two primary materials that make this object.
What do you think the function of this object was?
I would say the function of the object is, I mentioned gardening tool earlier, perhaps to work in a garden, perhaps obviously to work outdoors and to work in a field, to work in perhaps with dirt, with soil, with crops, or with other plants.
So far, our first three questions were, what is it made out of, and what is the object's function? And what we've had in this conversation is this idea that it's a gardening tool or some kind of outside tool used in dirt, used maybe in weeding. It's made out of some kind of mixture of wood and metal or iron work. It has nails to it. It looks used, it looks rough, right? And so clearly it's something that's used or was used on a regular basis. And so we can infer all that just from observing the details of the object. If we go a step further and ask an even deeper question, who made it? Who used it? Who owned this object? Who do you think might have been the primary, not only owner and user, but person who experienced what working with this object would have felt like?
Well, I would say who made it? That's a great question. I would think someone who was skilled in the need for tools for farming or for gardening. I would think that maybe, a laborer obviously used this tool, maybe someone who is working on a farm or a farmer themselves. And I think that whoever owned this tool probably used it quite a bit because it looks like it might be really rusty. It looks like it's been worn down quite a bit. And so I think this person worked really hard for a really long time, probably in a number of different environments.
That's a great inference. And I think using some context clues and also bringing in some information about history. Gloria from our audience has mentioned a little bit deeper about that. It's used around soil and agricultural plants. And I think very much to the point of this object biography, you're starting to gather a little bit more context clues and a little more information about where it was used. Now, if we go a step further and try to then infer, how did it get here to the Smithsonian? Where is it now? How do we have access to this object to be able to take a photograph and be able to really look in depth into it?
Well, I think that since you and I are talking, I think that this object is in a Smithsonian collection. And I think it's in the museum because it represents a really important story, an important American story about the importance of farm labor and perhaps migrant labor that helped build this country.
So that is completely correct in that it is a short handle hoe from the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. It is made of metal and wood. It was used to toil the soil in particularly in California, in the fields of California, particularly with lettuce and other crops that needed picking. And to our audience members, Gloria's point, it was used to subjugate farm workers, in that it was made the farm workers bend down and spend 8, 10, 12 hours toiling under the hot California sun in the dirt, bent over, trying to till that soil with that very small farm tool. So much so that what we later learn is that this tool is later outlawed because of the fact that it is so backbreaking, and that it actually is a tool of oppression. So we learn a little bit about the object through learning and looking, right? And spending a good amount of time trying to understand from looking, but also from pulling in context clues, pulling in information that we have from a historical perspective. So as you think about how you can deploy this in your classroom, think about how you teach the farm workers movement today, and how powerful it would be to be able to showcase this object, which is also hosted on the Learning Lab, and be able to zoom in on it, have your students be able to go through this object biography exercise and really give the object a story, and then connect it to that paragraph in your history textbook that talks about the farm workers movement and that talks about why the farm workers movement occurred. Next slide, please.
So the story of the farm workers movement is a really important one because it shows how two very different leaders that we see here, Cesar Chavez and Larry Itliong, along with many other powerful leaders like Dolores Huerta, who is not pictured in this image, Philip Veracruz, and so many other communities that worked on these fields for years and years, doing backbreaking, hard labor, how they came together to forge the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, which brought significant change for Latino, Latina, and Filipino American farm laborers in the form of better pay, better hours, better support systems for themselves and their communities in the forms of creating banks and community centers. It also led to the banishment of the short-handled hoe. So in thinking about the changes that happened from this movement, the changes that happened from two communities that came together through communication, through civil discourse, through coming to terms and reflecting on where they've been and where they want to be now for a better future. This is a really powerful story. So I want us to hold on to our observations about the object and the object biography that we just did together and move on to another question. What are the challenges and opportunities to teaching and discussing histories of movements, such as this one, but not limited to this one? So if we go back to our Padlet, if you open up that link again, you'll see this question as question 2. So if you could share with us your thoughts, that would be fantastic. We'd love to learn more about the challenges and opportunities and talking about movements and talking about the outcomes of movements and how we benefit from them, but also how sometimes the outcomes of movements are imperfect and there's always so much more work to do. In our work at the Asian Pacific American Center and the Latino Center, social movements are important for our respective community histories and also in how our communities have worked together to affect change. We also know that these stories, while having taken place in really specific localities, such as California with the farm workers movement, that these stories have an impactful national resonance more than we may realize. So in wanting to bring together these stories to the nation, we developed a 6-step methodology and process that we hope helps educators and their students see these community histories as great examples of civil discourse, but also as great examples of a national American history. So I want to reflect on some things coming through the Padlet, and once again, thank you all for participating, is that there is a danger of a single story, potentially traumatic to some in your classroom. Absolutely. Towards the end of our presentation, we're going to provide links to our resource kit, which is in the form of 2 learning labs. And we also link to an incredible TED Talk about the danger of a single story. And that is an incredible, that's a really powerful reminder for us in this work. Thank you. Thank you so much for engaging with us in the Padlet. So if we could go to the next slide, please.
So here we're going to really dive deep into the methodology or the process. These are 6 steps. Let's think of it as 6 steps that we can use to talk not only about the farm workers movement, but about any really important, difficult topic to break down in the classroom. So this can be about the farm workers movement, but it can also be about the civil rights movement, or it can be about voting, or it can be about any number of issues that, as a society, we've either encountered in the past or we're encountering in the present. And really our idea here is to give you a toolkit of ways to break down your way to prepare for this conversation in your classroom, way to then facilitate this conversation in your classroom for your students, and then your way to then build a team that can help continue this conversation and continue this work. So we are using the farm workers movement as our first case study, but this is something that you can apply to any number of things that you're teaching in the classroom, whether it's history, science, language arts, arts and visual arts. This ties to lots of different disciplines. And what is step 1? Step 1 is identifying your transferable skills. And I think we all have heard the phrase transferable skills, things that we have built over time, knowledge and practices that we've built over time that we can apply from one thing to another. And so I think one of the things that we wanted to start as the base of this process or this pedagogical steps or methodology, whichever sort of phrase you feel most comfortable with using, is this idea that we have a baseline. Where do you start from and where do you wish to go? So in the Padlet, back to that Padlet link, question number 3 and question number 4 are both about your transferable skills. So if you would like, while I'm talking about this step, please feel free to answer the questions in the Padlet. Identifying your transferable skills starts with really in our civil intersections framework, it starts with this idea of taking inventory. And so we have a worksheet that you'll find in our Learning Lab collection on this project that really helps you think and dive deeper into what are the skills that you excel in? What superpowers do you have as an educator? What do you know that you do well and that you already do that your students respond well to and that you could use as you go forward in trying to break down these difficult conversations? And then it takes it from what do you do now to what do you wish to do in the future? And I think that's where those last 2 questions, question number 4 in the Padlet, we summarized into what skills do you wish to learn more about? What superpowers do you hope to gain? Do you hope to build on? And I think this is also part of this process is really working on where do we excel? Where do we need to grow? Where do we have gaps? And how can we find people in our communities and in our networks that can help us build those? And hopefully one of your networks is the Smithsonian, and us educators that are here at the institution are looking to find ways to then collaborate with you to build up those superpowers and those skills. Because one of the things that's key to this methodology is continual iteration, continual learning. I see that there's lots of responses in the Padlet right now. of various different types of skills that you excel in, transparency and candor. I think that's a very important part of any difficult conversation, is that we have to be honest, not only with ourselves, but with our students and with our community. I think that's a very important point. Storytelling, I think that's very powerful. The ability to use stories to take some of these really difficult topics like the farm workers movement and the oppression of the farm workers, and break it down into a story that's relatable to our students and to their lived experience or their family experience, or even the experience regionally of something they may have heard of in their community. So I think these are all really great points in how those skills as an educator, those superpowers, can really help. And then in terms of what you wish to learn more, and hopefully what our methodology helps you with, is developing those better facilitation skills to support students as they grapple these difficult topics. I think one of the things that we do, and we'll show you in the next step, actually step number 2, is some of those new skills that will support a conversation, a dialogue, and incorporating social emotional learning skills. I think as someone mentioned previously, these can be traumatic stories. These can be stories that are very difficult and that people have various different perspectives on. And I think the underlying point of our civil intersections framework is that we don't always agree with everything that our colleagues, our peers, our classmates, our community members think or say or have as their opinion. But the importance of having that conversation and having that discussion, and being okay with the uncomfortableness sometimes of having the difficult conversation and not necessarily agreeing at the end of it, but being better informed from all sides of a particular story or issue. Next slide, please.
I always love starting with reflecting and taking that inventory, as Emily said, and hearing Emily, you talk about these steps and seeing the answers coming into the Padlet. I'm reminded of what we've been learning about Cesar Chavez and Larry Itliong. They had very strong personalities and they did not always agree or get along on certain things. The movement did not happen overnight, and change did not happen overnight either. And so having to learn more about what strengths you bring, but also what strengths you bring and how we bring those differences, but also the shared desire to learn new skills or come together with our skills can be a really powerful experience, but also very difficult to do, and it takes time. Step 2 in our process is to leverage primary source materials. And here we have a list of some ways you can, well, we've identified some primary source materials, but also ways you can approach primary source materials. And I know we're previewing our Learning Lab links we'll show up at the end where we have linked to some of those. But if you're seeking to use primary source materials in classroom, we're here. Please use us. That's where the Smithsonian is your friend and partner, because we're great at that. But also there are great resources that may be available right in your communities and also in your libraries. So primary source materials can be available in a variety of forms, a variety of formats, and can be looked at through objects and object biographies. You all are already a pro at doing object biographies. If you take one object, it could be a 3D object like the short-handled hoe, or an image of it. It could be an archived image. It could be a work of art. And asking a series of those questions on what is it, who made it, where did it come from? All of that can be really interesting ways to pull back the layers to uncover a really powerful story. Oral histories are incredible, and the Smithsonian has so many incredible archives of oral histories. And the reason why we have the Atlanta History Center labeled there is because we're partnering with them right now, where they're going to help take stories from local Latinx newspapers from the Atlanta region that help us better understand the connections between Latinx communities in the South and their really interesting, fascinating connections with the farm workers movement. And the work that Emily and I have been doing on this project, we've been learning so much more about those who followed Cesar Chavez and marched with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, who eventually left California and moved to Texas, moved to Georgia, and lived their lives, lived really incredible, vibrant lives. But their descendants, their children are in the classrooms, they're going to school. And so educators that we've worked with are learning that legacies of the farm workers movement are right in their classrooms. Students have these stories and these powerful stories to tell. So do their families. Deliberation guides are a really great resource that's available at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. Deliberation guides help us look even more closely at primary source materials, whether they be maps or oral histories, and ask us to deliberate on a concern. And it's a really wonderful resource. I'm going to encourage everyone to take a look at it when we provide those links at the end. And in sort of thinking about history as a form of concern, if we think about the farm workers movement, what were Cesar Chavez and Larry Itliong concerned about? And how can we think about that as a way to understand the context of the movement differently? Another thing is literature. Literature is great. Literature is a great way to introduce these stories at any age group through children's picture books and through young adult novels. So we've added children's literature as secondary source material, and two great examples here, Side by Side, Lado a Lado, and then also Journey for Justice, the story of Larry Itliong. And of course, we've included links to great books that hopefully your library has available or can order, so that you would be able to introduce these stories from elementary school on up. Next slide, please.
So now we're going to dive into step 3. And step 3 is really that space where we're going to dive into the conversation of how do you structure this difficult conversation. And really it starts with understanding, who is this conversation difficult for? Breaking down that question. Is it difficult for your students? Is it difficult for you, the facilitator? Will it be difficult for the parents? Who is it going to be difficult for? So that you can really prepare and do some prep work as to how to then sort of mitigate some of those issues. There are tangible ways to approach difficult topics that are a way to make it a safe space, right? You want to create a safe space where the students feel like they're participating. Local communities might be able to give some insight as well. You want to seek new resources, whether it's using research materials or archives or oral histories, which is a great way to bring in first voice narratives into the classroom and really expand the perspective of some of these topics. And also offer students the ability to go beyond the dominant narrative, right? And I think that's one of the key areas and ways to do it. When we're talking about structuring difficult conversations in our toolkit, and I believe we are providing the direct link to this page, in our toolkit, we provide a worksheet that actually gives you the steps and some recommendations for structuring a difficult conversation. And it's both the pre-work, the during the conversation work, and the post-work. So I think one of the things that we want to make sure that we acknowledge is that there are 3 steps to these types of conversations. We as facilitators have to do some work before. Having students be able to do some journaling about a particular topic before, so that they can sort of get their mindset in the right space, and setting that stage. Giving some parameters, some rules to the conversation, modeling active listening and speaking with maybe a couple of your co-facilitators or colleagues, right? Your other teachers, that you can role model what does active listening really look like, right? And how can you have a conversation that respects each other's differences? Encouraging all the participants in the conversation to not jump to conclusions, right? Because that's something that we, as humans, it's a human nature approach, right? And so we give several different tips for how to prepare to set the stage. Then in the worksheet, there's a second part that really actually structures a guided difficult conversation and gives you suggestions for activities that you can try that can be used as a way to bring in both different conversational topics and perspectives of a particular issue, but also use it as a way to allow for reflection, for brainstorming, and for group work, right? To allow people to really engage in that sort of multiple perspective, multiple conversation. And then finally, we give you some post-work activations of what you can do afterwards. And one of the big things that we have incorporated into this methodology is this idea of reflection, not only of ourselves as facilitators, but also students, giving them space to really process and think about what they've learned and understood from these conversations and from the readings or the primary source materials. One of the big things that we've heard from educators is that many times we're so busy trying to teach, and we feel the same way sometimes in our own work. We're busy trying to teach and get to the next subject that we don't really allow for processing time, either for our students or for ourselves. So building in that journaling aspect, giving you some suggestions of different types of sort of quiet time, reflection time that can be used as part of the post activity and the post conversation reflection is really important. And we also gave you some ideas and tools for how to evaluate how this conversation went for your class, and really breaking it down into benefits and value statements, how individuals, the students, as well as your facilitators feel about a particular topic, and how it was treated, but also what it did for them. Did it spark their curiosity to learn more? Did it allow themselves to see themselves or someone they knew in this story? So I think mirrors and windows is part of that core way of sort of doing a check, right? Doing a temperature check, a check-in with the students to see how the conversation went. And again, always to continue to iterate. That is something that, with these difficult conversations, we're very aware of. And so in the Padlet, if you'd like to put your responses to question number 5, which is really around this idea of when you approach a topic that is difficult, who is it difficult for, but also how can you address it? And I think the point of it's the parents and community that often have issues. It is true. And I think this is where a lot of times that pre-work, that setting the stage, is engaging in a conversation, whether it's with your other teacher colleagues or your administration, or maybe the parent association, about the approach that we want to take, and the fact that if students are being exposed, one of our community advisors said something really important that really resonated with me. If our students are old enough to experience this kind of difficult situation, then they're also old enough to have a facilitated conversation about it. And it's better that they have a facilitated conversation in a safe space with the teachers and community members that they are building relationships with and can have trust and truthful and honest relationships with, than if that it is in an unfacilitated space that might create more trauma and danger for the social emotional aspect of the student. So thinking about how we can then really say, how do we approach this as a community, the teacher community, the parent community, the administrator community, and obviously the student community, all together working together. Next slide, please.
So a critical step in any of this work is to build in that reflection time, just as Emily said, and that's really hard to do. I personally have a hard time with that as well. But we want to make sure that we make it as intentional as possible that this becomes a step in this process, because it serves as a helpful pause to check in. And what we want to do is encourage as much time as possible as you would need for reflecting. So we also see this step as being reflected not on just this particular topic of civil discourse in the farm workers movement as a case study for civil discourse, but also as it relates to your general practice of educating and of learning as well. So in thinking about how this relates to your general practice, also how it does relate, at least with our presentation today, to civil discourse, to difficult histories and how you would define difficulty, how does all of this fit into your general practice? And so I'm going to direct you back to the Padlet. We have 2 questions on this slide here to build in some of that reflection time. And I know that the time we're building in for reflection right now is much shorter, but we hope that you take away these questions and hold them for the rest of your day and into the school year and then beyond. But if you go to the Padlet to question 6, there's this first question here. What has been going well for you? What could be better? And this is a really broad question. And what we mean by asking this broad question is, what has been going well for you generally right now? We're in the beginning of a new school year, still in a pandemic, and there are still many challenges and opportunities we'll be dealing with in different circumstances every day. So reflecting more broadly, what's going well? What could go better? And then along with that, if you go to question 7, is what do you hope happens after your time with us today? And why? Why do you hope that these things happen? So during the farm workers movement, reflection on past events fed into the call for change. Migration, hundreds of years of migration, really, backbreaking labor in fields of California, but up and down the West Coast, even from Alaska down to California, witnessing injustices and also witnessing new meanings of what it means to belong, but also what it means to be excluded and othered in this country. All of these experiences and these reflections fed into the coming together of communities to talk about now we make change. So today, movement builders and their descendants are still reflecting on this time of the farm workers movement, its imperfections, what worked, how we benefit from it, and also in their own organizing efforts for new acts of change that are happening right now. So we hope that this step to build in time for reflection can take you really far, far back in time to where you have been, to help you reflect on where you are right now, and also to help you reflect on where you want to go as yourself, as an education practitioner, but also with your students as well. Next slide, please.
So now we're going to dive into the second to last slide, which is really about building your team and understanding that we are not doing this alone. And I think to the point of several folks in the Padlet that have really commented about how there are various possible barriers to having these conversations, doing things in a team and finding ways to be cross-disciplinary, whether you're teaching this in a history or social studies course or a science course. How can you bring in the English and language arts teacher? How can you bring in the teacher that is talking about visual arts in social movements? How can you make this something that is interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, so that you can then build a community of support where you're all working together to develop these kinds of conversations in the classroom? And this might not be something that you want to tackle for every single topic or every single difficult conversation, but the ones that you think that are critical, especially in this current time, and especially with the current, sort of national state of conversation, having a team together that can then talk to the administration together and explain how you're going to implement these 6 steps, how you're going to build that safe space for dialogue and conversation, and also how you're going to get the buy-in from your administrators, but also the potential other community members that might be able to bring additional first voice perspectives, right? And center that on lived experience and personal experience, and how you can then bring that to teach to students and to parents, and create that buy-in, that network, that support is maybe something that you want to be thinking about. And so in the Padlet, the final question, question number 8, is what does teamwork and a community of support look like for you as you think of your own civil discourse and intersections work? And thinking about that, how also can we help support building those communities of support? Is it providing some ideas for how to connect some of these topics to multiple disciplines? Is it providing additional tools and strategies for structuring conversations and for having respectful dialogue? I know one of our viewers commented on having middle grade students understand and be respectful of each other's perspectives. We created a worksheet, and I believe our moderator will be dropping the link directly from the toolkit in the Learning Lab onto the chat, on what is cultural competency. And really it's about what is your cultural home. And it's a worksheet that allows students to work together as a group to define what is their own culture and their own identity. And one of the things it talks about is that many times when we think about culture, we're only thinking about the very top of the iceberg, but there's so many other things that are part of culture, and finding where those commonalities and where those differences are a great way to have that conversation of how to respect our perspectives and our individual experiences, and where to find those commonalities and those shared lived experiences or shared experiences of just being in a particular region or in a particular country or in a particular age group. So this worksheet is a worksheet that you can actually use with your middle grade students or your high school students to start that conversation about having various perspectives and opinions and how we can come together to find and respect each other's perspectives and differences. And so we dropped that link in the chat. It's also in the overall learning lab. In the overall learning lab, we also provide some tools for how you can deploy that in your classroom. Next slide, please.
So finally, the big reveal. Our 2 Learning Lab collections come in the form of a 2-part resource kit under the umbrella of it being Civil Intersections. And so you have the link to both part 1 and part 2 in the chat right now. Part 1 focuses on the story of the farm workers movement. So here you'll gain access to great videos, works of art, incredible images of objects in the Smithsonian collections to help you learn more about the story behind the farm workers movement and the sort of the events that led up to it, what happened during the movement, and what happened after. What I like about part 1 too is it shows some of the contemporary connections through spoken word and also through talks led by very young educators today, talking about the importance this movement has on them. The second link is part 2 of our resource kit that dives into the 6-step process that we've been talking about and walking you through. You'll be able to download key terms and definitions, worksheets that Emily has been talking about. You can also access great videos. We've included a few TED Talks that kind of break down the sense of difficulty and also the danger of the single narrative and the single story. And so we hope that the combination of all of these things, the content, and then the approach of the different ways you can talk about these stories through different inquiry techniques and then some, and then having access to a number of community creative resources that it provides a great way to start diving into this a little bit more. However, just as we said in the beginning, civil discourse can look different for everybody. And so we also want to emphasize that this is a very generative and process-driven project. And we also want to hear from you. We love to share what we've been learning and what we've been doing in this process. And we love hearing from educators who are willing to share with us their process and learning from this as well. You all have already done so fabulously on the Padlet. I'm really looking forward to kind of sitting with everything that you shared with us. But if we go to the next slide, please. We also want to leave with you our contact information because we hope that you stay in touch with us. We really do mean it when we say this is a very educator-driven process. We have an incredible community advisory that we work with, former classroom teachers and current classroom teachers who think about these questions with us. But we hope that in the future we can think about other forms of Asian Latino solidarity, Asian Latino stories that we can use as critical case studies for not only civil discourse, but other ways of belonging, other ways of how we can reflect on identity, and other ways we can think about how we come together and to really think about our place in American society and history and how we can look to history as a guide for the future. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I know we have just a couple of minutes left, and so we're happy to answer questions. But Emily, is there anything that you'd like to share before we start to wrap up?
Just to address a question that was actually in the Padlet about aligning to standards, this Civil Intersections case study, as well as the framework itself, the 6 steps are aligned to the C3 education standards. So we did think ahead in terms of how we can pull this together and understand that teachers need alignment to standards. So if you go into the Learning Lab, you'll see a specific slide that just talks specifically about the standards that it addresses. Obviously, we can work together with educators to, really specify based on what content you want to look at particular standards. And I think the only other wrap up is, I think really this is about engaging in conversation and dialogue. And I think really what we hope that we're sparking is a curiosity in learners to learn more, to become lifelong learners, and to want to be participants, civic participants in their own communities.
Absolutely. I would like to share something that just came through in the Padlet from question 8. And I want to thank the person that shared this. They said that teamwork for me is working together toward a common goal My mother marched with Cesar Chavez. She learned from him organization skills and was able to bring about change in her community. I would like to impart that to our students. I think that's really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Ashley just posted a question in the chat. How much you go about determining your next case study? So part of the exciting thing about this case study is that it is part of the opening of the Molina Family Latino Gallery, the first Latino gallery on the National Mall, which will open in spring of 2022. Some of the topics are about intersectional community dialogue. And so we have Afro-Latino stories, we have African-American Latino stories, we have Asian American stories. So that's how we determined this first case study. We will continue to figure out how to align the work of both the Asian Pacific American Center and the Latino Center, especially in those Asian Latino connections, not just in the two separate communities coming together, but also the idea that Asian Latino community members exist, that there are community members that are both Filipino, Puerto Rican, and exploring those ideas. So we'll be looking at how we build that together.
There are many more stories to tell, as always. Yeah. So I understand that there is a short question, a 3-question survey that you can access through how you're viewing us right now. So we'd love to get your feedback. And we do hope to hear from you if you use these resources. Please enjoy the rest of your day, this inaugural Smithsonian Educators Day. And thank you so much for attending our session. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and reflections on our many questions. And we hope that you have a great school year as well. Thank you so much.